Victor Sturgis is the Senior Tax Manager, Racial Equity Fellow at Crow, in the CEO Action for Racial Equality and Fellowship. At Crow since 2012 and a member of CFMA since 2014, Victor is driven by the belief in stewardship. As a tax advisor and innovator for his clients and as a former leader of his firm's African American Business Resource Group, Victor represents his firm on many diversity and inclusion task forces and committees throughout the accounting profession, including the Michigan Society of CPAs. Victor holds a master's degree in accounting from the University of Michigan, as well as his CCIFP designation. He truly believes that it is our job as citizens of our communities and employees of our companies to leave things better than how we found them for everyone and anyone who comes after us.
All right, welcome everybody to our session, the last session of the day, and it is our Why Behind Diversity and Inclusion, otherwise known as our Why Behind DE&I panel. So as the introduction said, I am Victor Sturgis. I am your moderator for today. I'm very happy to be able to bring you some very experienced, amazing panelists today. But before we get there, I want to make sure to give a quick plug to the new CFMA DE&I committee, newly formed this year. And the leader of that committee this year is Bruce Orr from Pronovos Construction Analytics. And I want to make sure to shout out Bruce and his family for becoming a new dad and them having a new baby in their family. So shout out to Bruce for that. We look forward to your leadership for the DE&I committee. One thing I wanted to do to help us get level setted before we get started with our panelists today is something that we do before each and every one of our DE&I committee meetings. You know, during the day, we have a lot of tasks, we have a lot of meetings going on from various topics and subjects. We usually start with what we call our rules of engagement. And it's really meant to level set us and get us in the right mindset to have these often personal and sometimes difficult discussions around DE&I. So join me as I read through our rules of engagement to help level set our session for today. Assume positive intent. Engage in dialogue, not debate. Hold yourself and others accountable for demonstrating cultural humility. Be open, transparent, and willing to admit mistakes. Embrace the power of humble listening. Create trusting and safe spaces where a little bit of discomfort is okay. Commit to having conversations that matter by speaking up to bridge divides. Suspend your right to be offended. Look for an opportunity to be second. And your voice is important. Ensure that it's heard. With that, I have the honor of allowing our panelists to introduce themselves. And so first, let's go to Brittany to make an introduction.
Hey, everybody. My name is Brittany Diedrich. I'm with Industrial Builders Incorporated. I'm the Director of Finance and Administration for this company and part of the third generation ownership. We're headquartered out of West Fargo, North Dakota. And I got involved with the DE&I task force. As Victor mentioned, it's now a committee, so we got promoted, which is cool. And yeah, I'm here to kind of show you what the dipping of your toe into DE&I is, because as far as our company goes, we are well-intentioned, but we don't really have much groundwork laid yet. So the rest of the panelists are amazing, and I'm kind of here just to show you a barometer of a beginning person. So
Great. Thanks, Brittany. Rachel, how about we go to you next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Hudson. I'm an HR programs manager for BKD, a national public accounting firm. I have over 15 years of HR experience, and about 8 years of that has really focused on the employee experience. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, employee engagement, coaching, feedback, mentoring, all of those wonderful areas. And I've worked in a variety of different industries. Unfortunately, none of them construction, but public accounting, nonprofit, retail, and then finance and banking. And then I'm joining you today from beautiful Northwest Arkansas.
Great. Welcome, Rachel. Willie, how about we go to you next?
Hello, my name is Willie Pegues. I'm the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Macau Gordon Construction. We're located in headquarters in Kansas City, Missouri. We have regional offices in Wichita and in Manhattan, Kansas. In terms of my involvement in DEI, it spans across healthcare, military, and now construction. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation.
Thank you, Willie. Happy to have you. And last but not least, Simeon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Simeon Terry, Vice President, Diversity Affairs for Austin Commercial. We're a general contracting construction firm headquartered in Dallas, Texas. We're over 100 years old, and I have the distinct pleasure of leading our diversity and inclusion efforts within the company. The company is very proactive, but again, always looking to improve in that space. And so I've been with the company 21 years. Been in the construction industry 30 plus. And so I'm very honored to be part of this great panel and look forward to having some great dialogue and discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Simeon. So as you can see, we have a breadth of experience and different perspectives on this panel. So we're excited to get into some questions. But before we get there, let's go to our first polling question of the day. So that should be popping up on your screen shortly. I'll read it off. Where is your company in its D&I journey right now? A, not something that you've considered as a part of your normal business practice. B, you're thinking about it, talking about it, but you don't really know where to start. C, you're trying some new things out. Or D, you've launched some initiatives and had some success, but also have had to make some adjustments to those. So go ahead and respond to that poll, and I will track the results. Right now, it's looking like a lot of, 32%, about a third of the groups, the folks on the call have launched some initiatives that have had some successes and some adjustments that need to be made. That number dropped a little bit to 25%, while 30% now is not something we consider as part of our business practice. So that seems to be the leader as we wrap up the poll. So this will be a great discussion for us to get into, to talk about the business case around D&I. It's the entire purpose of the session, right? The why behind D&I. So let's go to our panelists then. So I think it's important for us all to be grounded in our definition of D&I, DE&I, all of the different words and all of the different letters and acronyms that folks use. So for this group and for our discussion today, let's define what those terms are. So Willie, can you start us off by defining DE&I for the group?
Yeah, thanks, Victor. As Victor said, it's really important, especially when you're starting this journey, to establish a shared understanding. So from a perspective, diversity represents the individual differences in identity, group perspectives, experiences, skills, and talents that make up your organization. Inclusion embraces those differences, which allows organizations to achieve a higher level of performance. And equity is a process of acknowledging the existence of advantages and barriers and continuing to correct and address the imbalance in order for all individuals in your organization to be successful. It's very important to establish a shared understanding, because when you're having these conversations, everybody has different experiences. And they're going to see DEI through a different lens based on their experiences. So it's very important to establish that shared understanding. So when you're having those conversations, you're approaching it from the same perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great response. I mean, how do you have a conversation when you're not coming from the same perspective? And so as an organization, we wanted to define it for this discussion today, but as an organization, as you start your DE&I journey or continue down the path of your DE&I journey, it makes sense to define those terms. And so, Simeon, I know that your organization has a different idea, and I put emphasis on idea, the acronym, around your DE&I strategy. Can you talk about what the acronym stands for and why it's important that you have that foundation of definitions?
Sure. And again, it's everything pretty much based off of what Willie said is in line. And every company has to do things or should do things a little bit different based off their culture. We just kind of switch the acronyms around. It doesn't change the definitions, but we look for inclusion because it is an action. And so we feel that, having an inclusive mindset, inclusive culture right off the bat allows you to be allows you to maximize your diversity capabilities, which are a result of inclusiveness. And then, of course, the equity, making sure that everybody has the same opportunity for the same outcomes and achievements. And then the A at the end is for access, because sometimes you can start off right, but wanting to make sure that everybody along the path and long term has the same access to resources, into the same opportunities and those types of things along the board, so that it is consistent and it is maintained throughout the life cycle of the intentions of the program or your company culture, so to speak. So we just kind of switch it around a little bit, and then also too, it kind of helps some people to remember what some of those definitions and things are. So again, having that inclusive mindset, because it is an action. If you start out there, we believe, then everything else kind of falls in line from there, and it's a little bit more receivable.
Thanks, Simeon. You brought up the word equity, right? And I think there's a lot of confusion around the difference between equity and equality. And I have a slide here that we'll pull up that kind of explains the difference. But Simeon, do you want to kind of take a deeper dive on the difference between the two terms?
Yeah, and one of the things is that, as we become, again, culturally more and more aware and visual, a lot of times I personally hear people misuse equality and equity with with good intentions, but don't fully understand it. So sometimes a picture, as I say, is worth 1,000 words. And so again, on the left, you see where each individual has gotten the same box, same size, same shape, depth and everything. But again, based off their individual differences, the outcome is not favorable for all of them. And evaluating the differences in whatever situation may be, and then adequately providing the resources, the equitable resources, so that each person, each entity, each group has the same outcome, the same positive outcome. And so again, the picture kind of speaks for itself, where again, you don't have the same equal distribution of resources, but you have the same outcome because you've allocated the appropriate resources based off of the analysis of the diversity of the various individuals.
Excellent. Thanks for defining that further for us. It is very much a confusion point in discussions that I have on an everyday basis as well. So let's move on to our second polling question then. And this is something that Simeon mentioned during his definition of the acronym IDEA, right? What does the A stand for in IDEA? A, access, B, amplify, C, allyship, or D, anthill?
Definitely D.
Definitely D. All right. Great. So let's go ahead and move on to the next question for our panelists. So now that we have a good foundation, for our discussion today around, the D and I and the E, and sometimes there's even a belonging in there as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I'd like to kind of get a little more personal with our panelists and understand their why or their company's why behind DE&I. And this kind of starts to move us more into the discussion of the business case around DE&I for your companies to consider. So, Willie, let's go ahead and start with you again around that. What's your why behind DE&I or your company's why?
Well, thanks, Victor. First and foremost, there is a traditional bona fide business case for DE&I at my organization or any other organization. But before going in that direction, the genuine business case is not because of the bottom line that it provides. It's the right thing to do. So that's where organizations should start at, is it's because it's the right thing to do. It just so happens with the traditional business case that, and I'll quote this study by McKinsey and Company in partnership with Society of Human Resource Management, found that companies that exhibit gender and ethnic diversity are respectively 15 to 35% more likely to outperform their less diverse peers. Now just think about that. There's hundreds of studies out there that talks about where most diverse companies outperform their less diverse peers. So that is the business case in regards from a organization perspective. But again, it shouldn't be just about the bottom line. It's because it's the right thing to do. And that's really what's going to resonate with most people. Then you can transition to the financial piece in terms of having a better bottom line.
Great. Thanks, Willie. So Brittany, we haven't asked you a question yet necessarily. So I know that you recently, shared a very personal story in a CFMA publication about yourself. Do you want to touch on some of the highlights of that story and maybe talk about the after effects that you've seen about what DE&I means to you?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess to kind of circle back to what Willie was just saying, I think on top of the business case, obviously the bottom line improving, as someone who's kind of dipping their toe in this sphere because it is the right thing to do. One bargaining chip I've brought back to is we're in a workforce shortage as well. So on top of being profitable, there are a lot of humans out there that we would love to have work for us. So creating an inclusive workplace where you're getting more people is another good carrot if you're trying to convince the elusive upper management out there. But yeah, so I wrote an article. Our DE&I task force, Bruce Orr, kicked it off. He kind of kicked the whole thing off with an awesome LinkedIn post about his experience as a Black man in construction. And it started this series of articles on building profits called Diversity Dialogues. And I was picked for the May-June one because I'm gay, and June is Pride Month. It was the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, which started all of Pride. So me being me, by the end of the panel, you'll probably figure out that I'm more of a straight shooter than I should be. But I just basically, they asked me to write about my experience as a gay woman in construction, and I did. And that had to do with who I am as a person and how growing up in North Dakota, which, really kind of regretfully legalized gay marriage when the Supreme Court made them do it. That's kind of been the environment my whole life. So I was slow to do it. And that's what the article was about, coming out in construction where women are kind of a novelty item. And then being a gay woman is, kind of a double whammy. I look great on EEO reports, but that's, kind of where it was. And so, I wrote about that experience and the fact that it's a family business. Our community, the LGBTQIA plus community, has made so much progress, but it's still scary. And even working in a family business where I knew I wouldn't lose my job because my dad probably is not going to fire me because he loves me, I was still scared. So I wrote my article. And the other half of my task force, or my article, was my friend Jordan, who's a white straight male, also in construction, and he wrote. I wrote all about coming out and being gay and being afraid of going to sleepovers because I didn't want people to think anything of me or whatever. And he talked about his work on the job sites and how he's seen people perceived. And right after the article came out, it was really great. It was a really positive environment, and then. As time kind of went on and people, people that are closer to me, I'm not going to roast anybody specifically, but, I got a little crap for being too personal and not talking about my sex life, which it wasn't my sex life. It was, my relationship with my wife, who's super cool. But yeah, so that was that was kind of a weird thing because our industry doesn't talk about emotions. We don't talk about diversity. It's a thing where you keep your head down and you do your work. And that's why we have so many of these emotional barriers to entry. And it's just, again, if I hadn't been in the family, who knows if I would have stuck around with some of the things that I've dealt with. Even when I wrote this article, I was pretty proud of, to hear people close to me saying, you should have kept it business as usual. You should have just talked about work, was kind of crazy. So it was a good experience and I would do it again. But I probably would change, I guess, my expectations of other people. But on the long run, most people were super positive. And I think that the most important thing is for people who are of diverse walks of life, especially if they get elevated to leadership positions, especially if they're elevated to leadership positions where they know there's not going to be any retribution, just to do the right thing, which is kind of the gist of everything we're saying today. Because if we share our stories, we breed empathy, we breed understanding, and that results in change, which is what our industry really needs. So that kind of was my whole thing is, I decided to speak up a little bit, and I'm happy that the CFMA gave me the opportunity to do so. And I think it was good for the industry, but it's still pretty fresh, and it was slightly not quite as expected, but it was good. And in general, our industry just needs to be more inclusive of everybody who's diverse, because people don't do their best work when they're under stress. They don't do their best work when they feel that they're in an environment they're not accepted or safe. And if we have wonderfully bright, diverse people that are trying to join our industry and they're burning out because they're wasting so much energy hiding a part of who they are, they're going to go to an industry, and that industry is going to thrive, whereas we in construction are just going to sit here wishing we'd done better.
Yeah. And really, thank you so much for being brave and vulnerable and sharing that story with everyone, especially with the audience today. I can't imagine what it was like to go through that, but like you said, being brave and doing that really kind of gives others the path to do the same, so they can kind of bring their full selves to work and hopefully thrive in a welcoming environment as well. So, and I think we have some statistics to back that up here with my question that's coming up to Rachel. Rachel, can you talk about your experience in HR and DE&I at BKD and the why behind DE&I for you?
Yeah, Brittany, thank you so much for sharing that as well. I mean, you touched on so many important topics around inclusion, exclusion, and then this feeling of belonging as well. That's a human need. And it's so interesting when I read research, feeling excluded actually provokes a physical response very similar to pain. And it's a human need to feel like we belong. And so that feeling of belonging is often that end result for a lot of D&I objectives. Inclusion is a set of behaviors. Belonging is a personal need of just feeling like you're valued, your voice matters. You're a part of an organization or a team. And it also has very strong metrics or an ROI for businesses as well. So there's a company called BetterUp. They're a coaching and consulting firm, and they partnered recently with Harvard, and they took a pretty deep dive into this topic of belonging. And what they found is employees who felt this strong sense of belonging demonstrated a 50% reduction in turnover risk, a 56% increase in performance, and a 75% decrease in sick days. So I don't know, most companies are actively trying to improve those metrics. And then their study actually calculated that for a 10,000 person company, this would actually correlate with an annual gain of over $52 million from boosts in productivity. $52 million, that's huge. And at BKD, we've been taking a pretty deep dive into engagement, trying to figure out what our workforce needs to be very highly engaged. And we've found a really strong link between engagement and this feeling of belonging. meaning that when employees feel like they belong in their team, in their organization, in their department, they are much more likely to be highly engaged. And the reverse is true too. When they feel like they're excluded, when they feel like they don't belong, that often promotes disengagement. And it often promotes kind of a mentality of having one foot out the door. And so this is a really, really important thing to develop for your company. And then many of us are trying to recruit talent, right? I mean, I keep hearing the phrase, a war for talent. When employees feel like they belong, they're 167% more likely to recommend their organization as a great place to work. That has a direct impact on your recruiting efforts. So, and I know that many of you are probably wondering now of just where to start developing that feeling. And I'll give you a couple of tips, just kind of high level, and then of course we're going to continue the conversation. Number one is pay attention to your managers. Pay attention to how they act and what they say. Most of your company culture is set by your managers and your leaders. And so hold them accountable for the behaviors that you want to build, because they are building your culture every single day, whether you like it or not. And then number two, create some trust and safety within your organization. Not only so employees can raise their hand and voice concerns when things aren't right, but also so they have that psychological safety to share their ideas, perspectives, challenges. All of that helps contribute to innovation. It helps create a more inclusive workplace where everyone can bounce ideas off of each other, where they're not scared to voice their opinions.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. I mean, there was a whole lot of information in what you just said, really painting the picture for the people strategy and the business strategy around DE&I. And so let's go to our next polling question, although I realized there was a technical issue, and I think polling question number 3 actually came up instead of polling question number 2 last time. But let's look at that actually. Before Rachel gave her answer to the last question, folks answered the polling question, which is, what's the reduction in turnover risk when employees have a high sense of belonging, right? So what's the percentage reduction in that risk? 39% of participants said 50%, and 38% of our participants said 80%, before Rachel even told them that the answer is 50%. So this group can already see the people strategy, right? The cost to, first of all, finding, recruiting, hiring, training, getting to a level of production of an employee is tremendous, right? And so if 50% of that risk is reduced when an employee feels like they belong, it seems like DE&I is certainly a strong people strategy that you should have in place as an organization. So let's continue down that path, Rachel. You mentioned recruiting and retention. Let's go to Willie. Let's talk about some of the strategies and approaches that your company has taken as it comes to recruiting diverse talent.
Yeah. So as we talked about, as Rachel mentioned, DE&I can be a people strategy. And in recruitment, as you take an assessment of your organization and you realize like, wow, there can be always more diversity within our workforce. So what are the steps? So what do you do? How do you go about doing that? The approach that we take is more so of not a one action to where, okay, we do this and then tomorrow we have diversity, in our front doors. It has to be a long-term strategic approach. So I say that you want to start looking at to determine, how do I fill that diverse pipeline into my organization? So at McConnell Gordon, one of the things that we do, one of the approaches that we take is partnering with school districts. And I'm talking K through 12, because we want to implant the idea of construction jobs into the minds of those students. Now, we go to any public school district that will allow us, that we partner with. But going back to that word that I used earlier, being intentional. So understanding we want to build a diverse pipeline. So we are intentionally also going to those school districts that have a large diverse population. So we go there with implanting that idea around, let's say, the fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. And then we come back, in high school. So not only have we planned the idea, but now we're coming back and say, hey, what are you interested in doing some learning a trade or learning as far as what other jobs that are in construction? So we try to offer internships, or we partner with school programs to where we're mentors to those students in their, whether they're working on a project or working in a committee around construction management. We try to provide mentorship because, again, we're trying to attract those students into our pipeline in construction jobs. And then we also try to offer internships, which we hope after high school, they go to college, and then it will lead to internships from college students, which will then entail permanent jobs after graduation into our company. So that is just one approach that we use, and that is a approach. There are several different approaches, but that's just one that I want to highlight for our organization.
Thanks for sharing that, Willie. And that's really building out that pipeline and getting folks in the door. Now, Simeon, I wanted to turn it to you to be thinking about how do you get those folks to stay, and how do you get them into leadership positions? I know you have at least an example of some inclusive leadership that occurred at your company. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I just want to kind of piggyback from Willie. Again, that's, we look at, again, then there's various levels when you talk about hiring and inclusive levels. But again, investing, we look at it as an investment into our youth, into our schools. We have programs where we have high school internships, along obviously with college student internships. But and it's not just geared strictly just for construction. We bring students in, particularly in the high school level, that they work in accounting department, they work in HR, they work in marketing and communications. Because when people think about construction, they just think about the sticks and bricks. But I'm sure Willie would agree that as construction companies, we still have all facets of a business. We have accounting, we have risk management, we have legal. Now, they may not be as big and large and solely focused on, but we do have all those different departments to operate our company. And so we try to get those students exposed along those lines. Getting them in is one thing, but again, keeping them. And again, kind of piggyback off of Willie is you got great numbers recruiting. So what? Where are you at 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 7 years from now? What does your EEO report look like? Oftentimes people will throw out their diversity inclusion statement. But I say, yeah, that's good, but show me. So, let's see your hiring record. Let's see your retention reports. Let's see your org chart. Okay. Typically in construction, you may say, yeah, we have a lot of different diverse people, but a lot of times they are field people. What does your senior leadership organization look like, and your directors and vice presidents and other things like that? So that's very important. But also, again, being intentional. Having experience this past year in 2020, which I'm sure we're all aware of and have seen a lot of television and news and things that went on, unfortunately. But I think with something with our company that really, for me personally, being there 21 years, took things to a whole nother level. Myself personally, as well as other people of color, received calls from other senior leadership and even some board members, and saying, you know what, I don't know what to say. I'm enraged, and again referring to the George Floyd incident as well as others. But I think that was kind of the icing on the cake, is whereas, hey, I don't know what to do, but what can we do? I can only imagine how you feel as a person of color, African American, and that meant something. That meant a great deal for someone just to notice and care and say, hey, you know what? I don't experience this directly in my life, but I have people that work for me that do. And so we want to make sure that we are making sure that they're mental health, their mental awareness is in check. So what do we need to do? Do we need to take some time off? Or do we need to put some support mechanisms in place, as well as when various other ethnic situations have occurred with Asians and the killings and things like that? And so there was attention to detail by senior leadership to reach out to employee owners. We're an employee-owned, 100% employee-owned company. And so that meant a great deal to many of us, and began to start a dialogue as well about support services and what are the things we need to do for employee owners of diverse backgrounds, ethnicities, genders. What are the things we need to do to make sure there's support there? Again, the part about inclusion is, you know, just think about in our own personal lives. We've all have been, I'm sure, to a party, to a wedding, to some type of function that we were invited to. And a lot of people have a lot of engagements going on, but we really just didn't feel included. People were nice to us, you know, and things like that. They gave us a plate to eat or something to drink, whatever, but we just didn't feel embraced, right? We've all been there at some point in time of our lives. And so thinking about it, particularly in our industry, construction, particularly in the field, if you got folks that have their minds and thoughts on other things, where it's very risk averse in our business, depending on what scope of work you're working on. I know myself, if I'm working with somebody and I'm on a high floor and they're part of making sure that I'm tied off or my safety is in check, I want to make sure that their mental health is in check as well. I want to make sure that they're thinking about the job here and not, you know, what occurred unfortunately on TV or you know, what may happen to them or things like that. So having those support services to make sure that all our employee owners, all employees, male, female, whatever ethnicity, religion, culture, sexual preference, whatever that is making sure that everybody feels comfortable, that everybody feels welcome and a part of the team regardless. Because when you have that, people will give you more. People will give you your all. They won't show up 1 minute before they're supposed to start work and leave right at 5 o'clock or whatever. They will go through the wall for you. So creating that culture of inclusiveness and embracing and understanding, you know, being open to understanding and having that dialogue means so much. And I've seen just internally with those few actions, the culture even changed even more for the positive.
Simeon, do you mind if I ask you a question quick as someone who's kind of a newbie to this all?
Sure.
So in construction, in my experience with construction, which is a lot of people who are older than me and whatever, there is like this, like it's not okay to say you don't know. Like you have to be the smartest guy or hopefully girl or whatever in the room at all times. And you've been in DE&I for a long time. Have you found like when people at our organization, we sometimes have issues where they're like, well, I mean, you can't expect me to learn all of these things about you. And it's like they brush off the fact that being aware of other people's experiences is going to take some time and learning, but it's also okay to say that you don't know. Do you find that that goes a long way? I know in the George Floyd story, you were saying people called you and say, I don't know what you're going through, and to me, that just means a lot because even though I know you can't empathize, the fact that you sympathize means a lot. And also that I'm not expecting you to be 100% educated on my perspective of life, but I just want you to listen to me.
You're spot on, Brittany. You know, that's one of the things is just having that mindset of understanding. Again, that meant so much. And just to say, you know what, I don't understand. I can't say exactly I know what you're going through, but the fact that it bothered me, a person who's not African American, I can only imagine what it's done for you. And so I think that is key. See, one of the things is people realize is that people don't want to feel uncomfortable, right? But let's think about it. People who are diverse, you know, or not the mainstream or whatever you might call it, me as an African American person, yeah, there's many times I've been uncomfortable, but I had to deal with it, right? I had to figure out, okay, how do I get through this and function and be productive, right? And we always seem to have to make others feel comfortable, right? And so sometimes it's like, yes, being vulnerable is being uncomfortable and having conversation. But most of the time, the people that I've talked to, once they have done that, people who hadn't typically done that, once they have done that, they have even learned more about themselves, and an understanding and realizing that, you know what, while there are differences, we want a lot of the same things. Even though we have different backgrounds, we do a lot of the same things. Okay. And so it's just being open to dialogue, and it's okay. It's okay being uncomfortable. Okay. You have to, I tell people you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? That's just a part of it if we're going to make any progress. And I think that is something that's huge. And again, I commend you, Brittany, for your story and your position in our industry, because I can only imagine again how difficult it possibly can be. But because of you and the way you're standing up, there are many others, I'm sure, that's going to help them break through, particularly in our industry. So I commend you and applaud you for your, not only your bravery, but just as you said earlier, just being a matter of fact and point blank person, to the point. We need more of that. Because of that, because of you, I'm sure that there's some others that say, hey, you know what? If Brittany can do that, Brittany can stand on those morals, then I can do the same thing as well.
Thanks, Simeon. And then also, I know I joined the DE&I task force after the rules of engagement were invented, but like 2 weeks ago, one of the rules, commit to having conversations. Oh no, wrong bullet point. Create trusting and safe spaces where a little bit of discomfort is okay. I like spurted that out in a conversation, and then someone was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so smart." And I was like, "I didn't come up with that. Where did that come from?" And then you just said it against me, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's our rules of engagement." But it's so true. It's like sometimes you're not going to be comfortable, but that's fine. Like there's change is uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean it's bad.
One of the things I would like to add to that, a lot of times when people are uncomfortable, they're silent. And when you're silent, you're leaving it wide open for people to assume that, oh, wow, no one said anything about what's happening. So I wonder, do they agree with it? I wonder, do they even care? I wonder, do they understand that it impacts me? And so that's what your associates think in your organizations when you're a leader, if you're not saying it. And it's not so much to where you have to say exactly what they want to hear, but back to Simeon and Bridget's point in terms of Brittany's point, they want to understand that, okay, they care, that they're trying. And that's really what it's about, because if you don't say anything, it's kind of like you're being compliant because you're not standing up and, doing the right thing. That's really important. And that's what your associates, that's what anybody that is marginalized, they want to know there are people out there that are going to speak up and do the right thing. Associates want to know that their leaders are going to have their backs.
Rachel, that's how you came off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's such an important point. You begin to tell yourself a story. You begin to shape your own narrative when you have that silence. And that's a key role of being an ally, is speaking up for other groups, using your position, using your influence, using your voice to help speak up for them. And last year, we had a very similar experience as Simeon. I think a lot of individuals weren't sure what to say. And we helped coach them to understand you don't have to have all of the right words, but you do have to reach out. You do have to offer support. You do have to check and see how they're doing and start that conversation. And that's really that first step of just being an ally, is showing that support, using your voice, checking on them. And so I think that's such an important piece that I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Willie was saying about silence is often not the path to take, because people fill in the blanks so often and they shape that narrative, and it's often the wrong one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a mindset that you can no longer be silent on things, right? The silence sends a message by itself, as leaders of your organizations. So really quickly, Simeon, I know that your company has recently taken on a project or took on a project that has some D&I and maybe some public relations implications, taking us back to more of, hey, how are we generating revenue for our companies and how does DE&I fit into that? Do you want to talk about that example of that contract?
Yeah, so we were several months ago. We were in pursuit of project, and many people may know or recall. I think back in 2016 in Orlando, Florida, and we had the One Pulse club, which was a LGBT club there in Orlando, Florida, where an individual came and killed 49 individuals. And so there's a project that came out and recently, and to build a museum and memorial and so forth. And so one of the things that we knew that this was a very sensitive project, obviously, given the nature of it, given the location and within the community. And so one of the things that we did was we went and we talked to people in the LGBT community, and we actually partnered. We actually had a couple of firms to partner and team with us in pursuit of this. So number one, again, that's something that we really try to do in our industry is, when we're building and going into a community, we really try to look at, the surrounding community that we're in. And how can we impact that community in a positive manner? How can we leave that community in a better position than when we found it? And many times it's whether it's hiring people, giving people an opportunity who may be unemployed in that community to work on a project or things like that. And so it was an opportunity for us to heighten our awareness and better understanding of the LGBT community there in the Orlando, Florida market. And so it was a great partnership. And we learned a lot of things. And again, I think really not just from a DI space, but just, again, culturally and from a community standpoint, and realizing again that, what, regardless of certain differences, we all want the same things, right? We all want to provide for our family. We all want our children to go to schools and be safe and the basic things. And so I think that for us was a very great experience, and continuously along those lines. And again, anytime that we go into a community, various different communities, we try to assimilate or adapt to that community and get them involved. Because again, when you create that ownership, you see that community thrive and the pride that goes along with that, whether it's LGBT community, African American, Hispanic, Asian, or other ethnicities or genders. Again, it creates a more sense of ownership, and those are some of the things that we try to do outside of just building buildings, but also help to build up communities and building relationships within the communities. And we've had a lot of great success with that. And I think it's something, going back to Willie and his business cases and things, it's like there's so many things that come out of it, particularly in our industry, which is why I just love being in the construction industry, because you impact so many lives. You touch a lot of things, and people can get a sense of pride, particularly when they get involved in that, because they can show their kids, their grandkids, think, hey, you know what, that building, that bridge, that road, whatever it is, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, I had a hand in that. And when you do that, children see their parents or other people from the community getting engaged and involved, and they want to tend to follow that path as well. So there's so many things that so many storylines that you can write along this within our industry and what we do. But again, it's just being open to that dialogue and being receptive to that.
Yeah. The question that's often asked in this space is what are organizations doing to be a good neighbor, right, in our community? And I think you hit it on the head with some of the things and the perspective that you brought from your organization as well. So, all right. So let's go back to a polling question here. I know this has been a great discussion, but let's get this polling question out of the way. So polling question number 4 is, do you feel like your leadership understands the business case to focus on D&I? So hopefully that's open on your screen now. And we'll see if the results start to come in. There we go. So ultimately, as those results roll in, hopefully you're taking notes on the discussion today, and you've gotten some points or some perspectives to consider and look into more around that business case for DNI. So continue to have those discussions, and with the understanding there are probably a few people on this call who are maybe a little bit more in Brittany's position and need some help on where to start the discussions. So I'm going to open the floor here again to our panelists to really share one or two best practices, where to start, best pieces of advice to take back from this session today for you, wherever you are in this D&I journey at your organization. That's going to help you, ingrain D&I in your company's overall strategy. So Rachel, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think the piece of advice I would give is create alignment with your leaders, whether it's the owners, your leadership team. You've got to have their alignment and support. And so developing some sort of business case can be really helpful to create that need. And I would suggest, as you look at creating a business case, try to identify what challenges you're trying to solve. What are the pain points? Is it recruitment? Is it retention? And then, to what Simeon was saying, go a little bit deeper than just your EEO reports. What positions are you having trouble recruiting for? Where are you losing talent? And try to really uncover those pain points and make them pretty obvious. And then try to, get your arms around some other statistics of just, we quoted some on today's panel of just how some of your diversity and inclusion initiatives could help solve some of those pain points. And sometimes, it's just opening up the conversation around, how you can build some of that culture of innovation, how you can attract new talent, how you can retain them. Sometimes it's also just about discrimination and harassment and the cost of some of those lawsuits. And so whatever language your leaders need to hear and whatever pain point they need to solve, align it to that. And then use some of those points to help articulate the why to not only your leaders, but to your employees and to your managers, so that it's not just kind of an HR initiative, it's a business initiative. You're helping to solve some of those business goals and objectives through this strategy.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Brittany, what about you for your advice for the attendees?
Well, like I said, I'm the newbie, so these guys know a lot more than me. So I'm just going to pipe up as a person who's been heard things that kind of alienated me or made me a little feel less welcome, or whatever. Whenever all of these issues, and I'm kind of a little gun shy because of North Dakota. Anytime I talk about pride, people start talking, we don't talk about politics at work. So me being gay is a political thing. And I'm sure it happened when we talked about supporting Black Lives Matter. It becomes a political thing, and it's not. And it is really, be careful about the language that you use when you're working with, one, to be more inclusive, but be aware that when you say that it's a political statement, when it's about human beings, is really difficult to hear. Because I'm now part owner, so I fought pretty hard this year for it. In the past, I kind of got brushed off, but we sponsored our Pride this August, and it's $500. It's cheap for our company and the revenue we do in a year. It's not much. But I was told, no, we can't do that. We're going to alienate customers. We don't get involved in politics. Just keep your head down. It's fine. And then finally, I was just like, this just needs to be a thing. It's not a political statement. It is a place where it is safe for people of all walks of life, or the alphabet mafia, like the Gen Z are calling us now. For us to gather and feel safe and welcome, and to sponsor that is not a political statement. It is just building a community and showing that you support that community. And all the years that other people have sponsored, and I've seen other companies' logos like engineering firms and architecture firms and tech firms, and I see their logos big and bold on the back of the 5K shirts for FM Pride. I get so jealous. And then now that we're on there, I'm just stoked because I know that other people in my position, if they see our logo, they're going to be like, oh, there's an ally. And it means a lot. So that's my only thing that I wanted to say is it's not political to be a human being. So try not to say that it is.
Thanks, Brittany. That's great advice for the folks in the session today. Simeon, what about you? You want to go next?
Okay. Yeah, for me, my question would be, doing a self-analysis. Are you company that is compliant or one that is committed? In other words, are you trying to just check the box so you can stay out of trouble, stay out of the news headlines, and everything, or are you committed to investing, realizing and identifying what is your company culture? It's great to go out and say, hey, you know what? We're going to recruit. We're going to bring in diverse talent. But I would suggest do a self-analysis first. Inspect what you expect. Or what are you doing now? Why haven't you been able to keep what you've had, or do a survey of the diverse talent that you do have and get their feedback on how they feel. Again, that's that vulnerability, and asking those questions that may make certain people feel uncomfortable. But if you don't have a good foundation and internal process, bringing more in is not going to solve the problem. Making great DEI statements and photo ops is not going to solve the problem. We've got to make sure that you have the infrastructure and the resources to not only bring them in, but to sustain them long term, making sure that they have career options and things like that. And it becomes, sometimes we get caught up in, well, what is my competition doing? You can't worry about that. What I tell people, and again, I've gotten a lot of calls throughout the years and emails and things of people asking questions and recruiters and different ones. And some of the things I say is, look, do what you can sustain. Okay. Start small. If that's where you're at, start small. Start with something that a year from now you can say, you know what, we started this a year ago and we're still doing it. Because I can point to various companies that over a year ago made statements, did some things, spent some dollars, but if you look at them now, they're right back to where they were, right? The dialogue is down, the spotlight is not as huge anymore. So for them, to me, it was like, okay, they were trying to be compliant, and not really committed. So those are some of the things that, look at your company culture. What can you do? What can you sustain and be consistent? Because then you become believable. Then people trust you. Then people want to come to work for, okay, you may not be doing what they're doing across the street. But again, when you're honest and open and saying, hey, here's what we can start at and do, and let's maintain that, and then let's build from there. And then you get other employees involved in that process. And don't just when you put together, diversity committees, don't just have all your, people of color or diverse people on it. Have a true diverse committee of everybody involved. Because again, everybody's not going to always agree with everything, but it's about an understanding. Okay. And then when you do that, then you're able to then provide the resources and then put in the process and procedures that's going to allow you to have a good, respectable DI program and culture, more importantly. And I don't like to say program because that makes it sound like it's compliant. Culture. Right? You want a culture, just like in your family, your personal lives, you want a certain culture. When people come to work for whatever that company is, people automatically know, well, safety is number one, right? In the construction industry, we always preach safety, safety, safety. Well, inclusion as well, right? Inclusion as well, because again, we want everybody to feel that they're part of the team. And when they feel that way, you watch your productivity increase. Okay, those are some other little statistics that if you're aware of, if you invest in that, you start looking at some of your productivity. You start looking at time that people take off from work, sick time, and things like that. Watch those numbers. If you become more inclusive and want to see that, that makes a difference as well.
Thanks, Simeon. And then last but not least, Willie, do you want to share some advice for the audience?
Yeah, I kind of want to piggyback off of what Simeon just stated. Commit, be intentional, be willing to be uncomfortable, practice grace, assume positive intent, and go below the iceberg. It's safe to stay on that surface, but go below the iceberg, go below the surface in dialogue, and be willing to be uncomfortable. And if you're an organization where DEI is a priority, you're wrong. DEI should not be a priority because priorities change. DEI should be a value to your organization. And then one last thing I'll leave you with. DEI is not just one person's job. It's not the person who's the DE&I officer. It's not the person who is the director of DE&I. It's not one person's job. It's everyone's job. You just have one person that's helping to develop the strategy and implement the strategy. But it takes the organization and the leaders throughout the organization to execute the strategy.
Such amazing advice from all the panelists. Quite honestly, when we were preparing for this session, we had so many great discussions that went on and on about various perspectives and various thoughts on this. So it's a really important discussion to be having around the leadership table at your organization. So, all right, so let's take a quick break here, an admin break, and look at the session word. And the session word for this session is worker. Again, worker, WORKER. Hopefully that makes me the spelling bee champion. There you go. And then let's look at polling question number 5, the last polling question. We'll get this one out of the way. And then we have a couple of questions from the audience we want to get to before we wrap up. So polling question number 5. Name one thing you can take back to your company from this presentation today. The difference between equality and equity, business case for DE&I, the people strategy, the business strategy. C, the understanding that DE&I is not a political stance or statement. And D, why the understanding of compliance versus commitment is important. So go ahead and answer that based on hopefully some of the information you're able to gather from today's session. And with that, we will go ahead and prompt the questions to be open, although we do have a couple questions that we will start with from the audience. So let me go ahead and bring those up and we'll feed it to the panelists here. So question number 1, is there any advice for an organization that is hesitant to hire diverse perspectives because it wants to protect that diversity from the personal opinions of those already on staff, or especially the opinions of owners of the company? Does anyone want to step up and take that question first?
I'll jump in really quickly.
Okay.
And then leave you guys to it. But my only perspective on this is a family business here, which means our boundaries are kind of messy. Maybe a lot of you work at construction companies with similar vibes. But typically, if you have that gut feeling, there's a reason. But the best way, I have been pleasantly surprised by almost everybody that I work at. Like Rachel was saying, people fill in the blanks. If people are silent, we assume things. If you've been burned in the past, you're going to assume the worst. So I have had many of these conversations with field people, with leadership, people that are retired, that are legends in our company. We've been around since 1953, and there's so many stories about these people. And just the fact that you have a gut instinct of that is good. And then most of our humans in our industry are in it because they like working with people, or they're very, straight shooters. And so if you approach someone and say, like, I think that I'm uneasy about this, especially if they've worked at the company for a long time. A lot of our thing here is, you can protect the company if you something that you said can be construed this way. Can you piece this out for me, and then I'm pleasantly surprised by the take they take. So I think if you have that gut feeling, listen to it, and don't be afraid to just talk to a human like a human and say that I have this weird feeling. Can you help me out here?
Thanks, Brittany. Does anyone else have anything else to add to that? Willie and Rachel, I saw you come off mute earlier.
Yeah, I would probably add, don't make decisions for someone else, especially when it impacts their livelihood, their career. That happens from time to time where we coach our leaders it's often well-intentioned, but they're trying to protect someone else. Maybe it's a new mom and they don't want to put her on a job that requires travel. Don't protect someone else. Don't make decisions for them. You are directly impacting their career success. So also kind of the contrast of that, if you think that you might hire someone that would walk into a situation where there is discrimination or harassment, you do need to address that as your first step, because your company is opening itself up for risk. And so I would address that, but then finally just don't make employment decisions for someone else.
Rachel, really quickly, we got a request for you to repeat some of the statistics that you put out there around turnover. Can I put you on the spot really quickly and you can run through those for the audience?
Yeah, I gave you all like a lot of stats really fast, and I'm like, oh, it's okay. I mean, these are financial folks, right? So some of the stats from this article or from this research study, and I don't know if there's a way we can share this after the fact as well. But employees who felt a strong sense of belonging demonstrated a 50% reduction in turnover risk, a 56% increase in performance, and a 75% decrease in sick days. Who doesn't want their employees to use less sick days, right? And not just for the ROI, because they want them to be healthy and come to the workplace, with their full self. So for a 10,000 person company, this correlates with an annual gain of over $52 million from boosts in productivity. So that's the one that resonates with me the most, $52 million annually.
Great. Thanks for sharing that statistic. Now, we have 3 minutes left. There are quite a few questions. I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to get back to those questions later so we can have the panel respond to some of those questions. Some really great questions that have come up in the chat that we want to make sure that they get the answer to. But I will say, this has been an amazing session, an amazing discussion, such great experiences and perspectives from our panelists. So thank you for attending. And again, let me go ahead and put in a plug for the new Diversity and Inclusion Committee for CFMA. There's going to be some more education and some more content coming to you, both I think at a national level as well as a local office level, going forward here in the coming months. We are okay. It's 4:45. I'm sorry. I had my time off there. So thanks for pointing that out. All right, so here, let's go to the next question then. So thinking of Brittany's situation, potentially being in a very conservative area, where showing support for diversity and pride and et cetera will truly alienate potentially a large portion of customers. Is it easy to say what the right thing is to do in that type of situation when it creates kind of a negative perspective of the business in that community? That's a really tough question. Billy, go ahead.
One of the things that I've talked about is, that is a difficult decision. If my organization supports this, is this going to potentially put us in an awkward position of maybe not being able to compete for a project or to be awarded a project? That is a tough decision to make for an organization, but oftentimes the hard decisions are the right ones. And if you're going to commit, commitment just doesn't come around when it's easy. Like, okay, we're going to celebrate this this holiday. We're going to celebrate Martin Luther King Day. We're going to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. Well, when things like George Floyd happens, and you're thinking that it's just going to fade away like things normally do, and it doesn't. Now you got to make a tough decision in terms of what you're going to do. Are you going to make a statement for your organization that's going to denounce what just occurred? The same way with making decisions in terms of, do you want to align yourself with an organization whose vision or philosophy is 180 of yours? I mean, I don't know if I will be able to work for an organization if they were telling me that, this whole DEI stuff, or this whole Black Lives Matter, or LGBTQIA, or whatever stuff is not for us. We don't want to worry about that. We got business to run. I don't know if I will be able to stay at that organization. And I'm just speaking for me from a personal perspective. But I think where businesses are headed, for whatever reason, the way they've aligned themselves in terms of, okay, you know what, we are going to start doing the right thing. That's going to force most businesses where they are traditionally used to not just as Brittany said earlier, they're calling these things political. We're not going to worry about those. Now they're having to worry about them because organizations are saying, hey, we want to align ourselves with businesses that have the same type of mission and vision that we have around DE&I.
And to kind of add to that a little bit, I think everyone, we talked about 2020 being an absolute mess. I think that brought a lot of things into perspective. We spend so much time at work. When I do things, I go all in. And so am I really going to devote myself 100% to something where I don't feel right? I think that 2020 probably catalyzed that for a lot of people. So I think there are a lot of people that are in the same boat as you, Willie, where they're like, I don't know if I can work for a company that doesn't care about this stuff. Like, I know we're profitable. I know, they're doing this right, they're doing this right. But if they don't care about the, respecting other humans or, doing the right thing, last year we were stuck in our houses with the people we cared about most. Are you really going to separate yourself from that situation for a place where you're not fitting, I guess? So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, because it's personal, right? It becomes personal.
Rachel, did you have something to add? Another quick minute here?
Yeah, I'll add, start the conversation and recognize that folks are at different places kind of on their journey too. And so often when you can start that conversation, you listen to their perspectives, they listen to yours. It helps open up some mindsets. It helps shift some things. Change does take time. Personal change takes time. I work a lot in human behavior, and influencing humans to change does take some time. And so you do have to be persistent, and you've got to kind of dig your heels in sometimes. But start, you don't have to boil the ocean kind of overnight too. Start somewhere, start that conversation, and use those rules of engagement.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And so I know this group has a couple of action items. There's still some questions that we're not going to get to today that we'll respond to. I saw some chat around sending out that rules of engagement. By the way, thank you, Rachel and BKD, for those rules of engagement. Those are great for us to start our DE&I discussions with, as well as maybe sharing some of those statistics for folks to be able to take back to their organizations as they're on their DE&I journey. One more quick plug, the DE&I committee for CFMA, we're always looking for folks to join that committee. So if you're interested, please reach out to myself or Rachel Hudson or Bruce Orr to be a part of that committee at a national level. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an amazing discussion. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. and enjoy your upcoming happy hour. Thank you very much.